Welcome, everyone. Today's Do Now is about women's equality. If we think women are being treated equal in the U.S. today, why or why not? There's lots of different ways to look at this and say legally women are treated equal to men in almost every way. The big major difference legally is the draft. Men are open for the draft and women are not. You could argue economically women are not equal, that men tend to have higher paying jobs and more economic opportunities than women. Yet more women go to college, so maybe that's changing. Um, you talk about socially, men and women are not equal, right? In different cultures, different society, women sometimes don't have as many opportunities socially as men, or as many freedoms as men socially. So lots of ways to answer this question. Today we're going to be talking about the women's rights movement. We'll go talk about some history of it before we get into the stuff from the 1970s. So the women had been pushing for more equality throughout the 60s and 70s, along with the civil rights movement. Women's rights movement had been going on for centuries at this point. One of the biggest successes was in the early 1900s with the right to vote, called that women's suffrage. Um, and that was obviously a big deal. World War II, women were able to work in factories as men were gone. This was also a big deal. Right? These were big moments that sort of pushed women further and further along the line towards equality. But in the 60s and 70s, women are pushing for more political equality. They have the right to vote, but there are not a whole lot of women in government. Right? Their political views and opinions are not really respected. So there's a big push for more female perspectives when it comes to politics, more social equality, the freedom to do things like get divorced and have an equal share in a divorce, which is also an economic issue as well. But socially having the right to do things, there's still places that women weren't allowed to go in American society. Most women were still expected to be homemakers and stay at home with kids and not go out um, during their social lives or anything like that. Economic equality as well, looking for opportunities to go to school, to get jobs that legally they could still technically do, but because of societal constraints that never really happened. So here's some pictures of women pushing for equal pay, right? Equal pay for equal work, women's liberation, the freedom to get away from traditional societal expectations. Right? Women pushing for peace. Right? That if women were in charge, there would be no war in Vietnam. At least that's what they're arguing. So today and tomorrow we're going to talk about something called the Equal Rights Amendment, which is going to be a push in the 1970s to legally get an amendment to protect women's right to economic, social, and political equality. This is an amendment looking to treat genders equal when it comes to employment, comes to pay, divorce, and education. Those are the main things this amendment laid out as men and women need to be treated equally when dealing with these issues. Now, when this is happening in the 70s and the early 70s, this is getting lots of support. I imagine where we are in the United States at the time, like the 1960s saw this big change in civil rights for African Americans and other groups, that the next logical step is women. A lot of Americans were at the point where, like, yeah, they were okay with this, especially the younger generation that protested in the 60s. In the 70s, they're pushing for this. Now, an amendment's different than a law. An amendment is like a super law, and to get it passed, it has to go through several hoops. It has to pass Congress with two-thirds vote, and then it needs to get three-quarters of the states to agree to it, which is 38 states. All right. And this Equal Rights Amendment has this big buildup, all these protests, it happens, and Congress votes for it. And then they put this limit. They said, okay, now that we've agreed to it, you get 10 years to get the 38 states to approve it. You need to get to 38 states. So all these protesters go from state to state to try and get each state to approve it. But in the 10 years, only 35 actually approve it. And ultimately, it fails. It falls three short. And here are the states that approved it in dark blue. You can see Colorado is one of them. It's mostly in the South that didn't, and a little bit in the West that did not approve this law. So there's so much support, and it seems so straightforward, right? Women should have equal job opportunities, equal pay, equal equality in divorce and education. Who would be against this? Why are states not approving this? It should be 50, right? Like, what's wrong with this? Well, there's this big push to stop it. Right? There's a counter protest. Um, there was people who were, sexist, right? But there's a pushback against sort of the way people were acting. So a lot of the protesters, a lot of the female protesters were very aggressive, very outspoken when it comes to liberation, and what they wanted to do. And this turned a lot of people off. America was a very traditional society still. They still had expectations for how women should act. And fair or not, the way feminists were acting, people didn't like. And the older generation did not like the way women were acting. So there's a big push against that. Also questions of like, would this destroy families? Would all women want to divorce all the time, and you destroy what makes the American family great? Um, Maybe this would put men in a position where they'd have to stay home and take care of kids, and they would be the ones cooking and cleaning, and they couldn't go to work and do all this stuff. Um, but the ultimate thing that really mattered, what really ended this Equal Rights Amendment, was the draft. All right, remember, we're in the middle of the Cold War. World War III could break out. And if we have an Equal Rights Amendment that says women have to be treated equally under the law, that means women could be drafted to be soldiers just like men. To be drafted means you're forced into the military. And this was a line that people weren't willing to cross yet. The idea that women would have to be soldiers. And this has turned a lot of people off. It scared a lot of people about their wives, their daughters being forced into war. They'd be acceptable of men doing this, their sons and fathers and husbands, but not women. And this was ultimately what killed the amendment, that people were not willing to take this step. This is one of the women who fought back against it. She was big into sort of traditional American family values, and she thought the Equal Rights Amendment destroyed what made women women. Right? She was proud to be a homemaker. She didn't want to be forced to go work a job in a factory. She said, what we do is respectable. Right? We do something, the most important thing in society, which is raise children. And we shouldn't be fighting to take that away from women, right? She looked at things a little bit differently, and thought that women did have equality. They had almost more power because they had control over the home and the raising of children. Right? There's different opinions on this and how you might react to this, but she was someone who fought against the Equal Rights Amendment, right? And saying the ERA will abolish free choice. Right? This idea that women would no longer be allowed to choose to stay at home; they'd be forced to go to work. All right, so we got a few videos we're going to watch about the Equal Rights Amendment. Your assignment today is to look at some documents, some sources from the time, and try to understand why the Equal Rights Amendment failed. So today we're going to be looking at documents. Tomorrow we're going to practice our writing.